Hello, for our discussion today, I would like to talk about the area of psychology called developmental psychology, which is as your textbook in chapter 9 calls it, the voyage through the lifespan. We fail to realize that throughout our lifetime, we're constantly changing in how we think, how we operate, how we act, and our brain's constantly thinking through the maturation process of from infancy to geriatrics or old age. We're constantly in the process of growing and changing and becoming different people. Someone has well said that you basically come into the world the same way you go out, naked, bald, toothless, and I guess that's really kind of true in a not so funny sort of way. Your book begins in chapter 9 by giving us some truth or fiction questions that I'm not going to read those to you because I think that they're pretty well self-explanatory, but we will look at those as we get into the text and talk about how each of those are true as we talk about developmental psychology. We start with prenatal development, which is the development of the baby in the uterus of the mother. And psychology begins, growth begins, life begins very early in that process. Those of you that have had children, that have born children, you realize what a very intricate process it is to bring a baby into the world, to feel it growing and developing even within you before it's actually born into the world. The first stage is the germinal stage, and that is the period from conception to the egg being implanted in the mother's uterus. That cell is called a zygote, and it divides repeatedly. It becomes implanted in the uterine wall. The next stage is the embryonic stage, when the cells become an embryo, and that starts with the implantation up until about the 8th week of pregnancy. It's during this time that the major organs are formed, that growth appears, and that growth starts head first and moves down through the body. Vital organs are formed, the extremities, and you begin to see, if you were looking at it under a scope, you begin to see the child take the form of a human being. It's also during that time that the genetic code, either an XX or an XY for a male or a female, causes the differentiation in sex organs. And this whole process is very complicated and very highly complicated to make a human being. The embryo is suspended in what's called an amniotic sac, which is a fluid sac that protects the child from damage and being carried in the womb, but also it provides nutrients, and waste are exchanged with the mother through the placenta. So while she's carrying the baby, there's actually an exchange of nutrients and waste with the child. The embryo is connected to the placenta by what's called the umbilical cord. And of course, when the baby's born, that is still attached and is cut, and that's where of course, the navel comes from. In the fetal stage, begins about the 3rd month until birth. It's characterized by maturation and an increase in size. Baby continues to grow. The heart rate starts beating when you're about 1/5 of an inch long and weigh about a fraction of an ounce. That's one of the true-false questions. That is true. So at the very early stage, you have heartbeat and growth. Here's a picture that I think you'll find interesting. You can see at this early stage these dramatic effects in the womb of a baby developing hands and developing his eyes and nose. You can tell that it's already a human baby at that stage. The child will begin physical development with reflexes, simple inborn responses elicited by specific stimuli, like rooting and sucking. A baby has been shown to suck its thumb while it's in the womb. There's withdrawal. There's a startle reflex, or the Moro reflex. There is a grasping of the palmar reflex, even in those early stages. With the reflexes also come motor development. That's a progression from very simple acts to more complicated acts as the baby matures, and the brain matures also. The environmental factors also play a key role in the motor development of the child. Here's a chart that shows you that a baby from lying around when it's born and hardly able to move to within 2 years, the baby is walking and moving and getting around. So this is the development. Motor skills continue to develop even after a baby is born outside the womb. There's also perceptual development. Within days of a child leaving the womb, they can track moving light. 3-month-olds can discriminate most colors. 2-month-olds can prefer human faces as visual stimuli over almost any other stimuli. And they can measure visual preference and show a fixation of time. These are all very important. Babies respond to cues for depth by the time they begin crawling. They understand there's an edge, or they can fall off of a table, or they can fall off of a couch. Newborns hear normally. They usually prefer their mother's voice to anything else, and they will turn their heads toward unusual sounds. But newborns can also discriminate distinct odors and smells, so their physical development is at a fairly rapid rate. This chart kind of shows you the preferences for visual stimuli. They would prefer the face of their mother to anything else, printed surfaces or any kind of design to color, all these things. This is percentage of total fixation time. So you see, this is by far the most preferred visual stimuli, and that is the face of the baby's mother. And I think that's a wonderful thing to think about. In the process, there's also cognitive development. That is the mental development, how children learn to represent and think about the world. There are several different theories of this, of how this develops, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but you can certainly read about it in your textbook. Jean Piaget developed what he called the cognitive development theory, and we'll look at that briefly. Lev Vygotsky, the sociocultural theory, the idea that your society and your culture have a way of helping with that cognitive development. And then Lawrence Kohlberg, the theory of moral development. How do children develop a moral behavior and a moral consciousness? Piaget's cognitive development theory had several pieces to it. One's called assimilation. You respond to new stimuli through existing cognitive structures, and then there's a schema or a mental structure in organizing knowledge, so that your brain kind of organizes and develops knowledge to a particular path, and you learn that by assimilating it or by taking what you see and applying it to yourself. And that's what babies are doing. They learn to copy behavior fairly early. The second step is called accommodation. And this is creating new ways of responding to objects. They not only will respond one way, but they learn to do multiple ways. The ability to accommodate to new stimuli advances due to maturation and experience. As that baby matures and gets older, it's going to respond differently to materials. Piaget also found that there was a sensor-motor stage that's characterized by coordination of sensory information and motor activity. What a child sees results in its movement or its motor activity. It runs towards something. It reaches to grab something. This is the sensor-motor stage. Early exploration of the environment. They still don't have language, but they still would look at a flower or look at a football or something and try to understand it. The idea of object permanence is quite interesting in this stage, because before 6 months, objects are not mentally represented in infants. In this picture, you can see the difference. The baby here is looking at the blue object on the table. You put a card between that. The baby does not try to look around the card to get to the object, because out of sight is out of mind here. And so up until about 6 months, they don't have that sense that the object is behind the card. And this is one of our true or fiction questions at the beginning. Prior to 6 months or so of age, out of sight is literally out of mind, and that is true. So they don't recognize that something is present unless they see it. In the pre-operational stage, they begin to come to learn and understand words and symbols to represent objects and relationships among them. A ball is a certain shape, it is certain color, whatever. Children exhibit egocentrism, a self-centeredness. It's their ball, it's their pacifier, it's their pen. Animism, artificialism, all these things are things that children adapt. Capable of understanding the law of conservation and objective responsibility, which is important. This chart kind of gives you some ideas of pre-operational thought. Egocentrism, why does it get dark out? So I can go to sleep. Why does the sun shine? To keep me warm. Where is there snow? Why is there snow? For me to play in. Those are ideas. It's all about the person, to sleep, to keep warm, to play in the snow. In animism, why do trees have leaves? To keep them warm. Why do stars twinkle? Because they're happy and cheerful. Artificialism, what makes it rain? Someone's emptying a water can. Why is the sky blue? Somebody painted it. What is the wind? It's a man blowing. So all of these things are examples of the different kinds of pre-operational thought that a child will have. And of course, they will develop and grow. The idea of conservatism, is it the same or is it different? A child begins to learn that this container here, this amount of water poured into this container is equal to this same amount of water here. So if they're equal here, they're still equal here. They learn to conserve and understand the difference. So truth or fiction, because mommy wants me to maybe a perfectly good example for a 3-year-old. That's true. That's about as far as they're able to understand. In Piaget's next stage, it's called concrete operational stage. The growing capacity for adult logic is shown. Children are capable of decentralization, reversibility, subject moral judgment. They're beginning to develop a moral kind of an attitude. So as we look at Piaget's theory, Piaget tended to underestimate a child's abilities. They usually have many more abilities than he dared to talk about. The process of cognitive development may be gradual. It's not limited to stages, and so it grows with time. And developmental sequences don't necessarily vary as he thought that they might. Lev Vygotsky's social cultural theory added to Piaget. He focused on the influence of culture and children's interactions with elders. And he honed in on key concepts, the zone of proximal development, scaffolding, how learning from culture, learning from society, learning from your elders kind of scaffolds the child and helps them to understand. As the brain matures, the child experiences new levels of insights, and this helps to develop new kinds of problem solving. So if there is in Louis Kohlberg's theory of moral development, he goes a step further and talks about the development of morals, using a story of moral dilemma to explore reasoning of right and wrong, shows a specific sequence. And in the pre-conventional level, the judgment is based on consequences of behavior. Stage 1, obedience and punishment. Stage 2, good behavior allows people to satisfy their needs. On the conventional level, judgment is based on conformity to conventional standards of right and wrong. The good boy orientation or the judgments are based on rules that maintain social order. And then you get to post-conventional, that judgment is based on the need to maintain social order and personal justice. We grow to learn that the reason we have laws or right and wrong is so that our society can survive. So as you look at Kohlberg's theory of moral development, research supports that moral reasoning follows a sequence. A post-conventional level requires a formal operational thinking, and Kohlberg underestimates the influence of social, cultural, and educational institutions and parents on the morality of their children. The moral consciousness of a child will usually not exceed that of the parents. So that's why it's important for parents to teach their children right from wrong, because if they don't learn it from the parents, they may certainly not learn it from going to school or being involved in other cultural or social institutions. And so it is vitally important that those things come from the parent. And so these developmental levels of understanding are vitally important when you realize when you're raising children that they go through different stages. And I would encourage you to spend more time reading this chapter, because there's some vitally important things here about the maturation process, which will be very helpful to you in child raising. Thank you.